Welcome, everyone. Welcome this Saturday afternoon to The Reason We Learn. Today, I'm bringing you a very important conversation with 4 parents of trans-identified children. These parents are here because they want to share information with other parents, other families, and even just concerned citizens, because they question the way gender and identity is being taught in our schools. And they also question the role schools may have played in their children's identification. I'm not going to do a lot of talking in this show. This is really their show. As you can see, they are not visible to you. They are coming here anonymously. These are pseudonyms, in part because they're concerned about the role the state might play in the relationship with their children if it's known who they are. They want their privacy. They just want to share this information for everyone's benefit. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over first to my guest, Claire. Claire, welcome to The Reason We Learn, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Thanks, Deb, for having us. I just want to tell you my story. My son is 17. 2 years ago, he, out of the blue, said, "I have to tell you something. I'm trans." And my husband and I were like, "What?" We questioned it because he, never had any gender confusion, loved being a boy, only played with boy things, only had friends that were boys, and very typical boy, completely conforming. And we didn't know what to think. We called the pediatrician. The pediatrician said, maybe you should see this gender expert who deals with ADHD as well, because we were thinking, well, maybe he just has ADHD and he's confused. And when we went to the doctor in front of our son said, he's never going to change his mind. If you don't support him, there's a 44% chance he'll commit suicide. Maybe you should start using she, her pronouns. And, as a parent, you're like, well, what? You're not going to assess him. You're not going to evaluate him. It couldn't be something else. It was just affirmation. And it was, so then my son felt, like he had this power that he was right and we were wrong. And, after doing some investigation, we realized that in 7th grade, he had learned about you could be any kind of gender, and that you could be born in the wrong body, that he learned at school. And we didn't know what to do. So when we realized later that he was bullied and was very uncomfortable with who he in his skin and who he was, and he just thought, oh, well, this explains it. I'm just trans. So for a kid who's, he's was identified as gifted and he's kind of quirky, we did get him assessed for ADHD, that he figured out, oh, instead of realizing he has these other comorbidities, that he's just trans. Trans was the answer, because if you look it up on the internet, that's what you're going to learn. And then once you come out at school that you're trans, you're completely affirmed, and you're love bombed, where before he was sort of ignored. And now all of a sudden he's, a cool kid because he claims trans. And we don't think that's what's going on, and we don't think that's good for his growth and his future. And we're just trying to push back and try to help him learn that you can't change your body, that maybe you could be happy with who you are.
Right. Would you mind explaining to the audience what you mean by love bombed?
Oh, well, they took special attention gave him special attention, which they had never sought to looked at before when he was just the kid eating lunch alone. They didn't take care of him there. But now it's like, oh, he gets special attention from everyone.
And this is the school officially as
Yeah.
well as the peers?
Yes. And then he told him a new name and wanted she, her pronouns, which they did without telling us. So when I found out, I emailed the counselor and said, we're not really okay with this. And she didn't respond. And then we sort of panicked thinking, oh, we could get him taken away from us. So we had to just accept that.
Why did you feel that? What was the what told you that could be a risk?
Because we've heard that it has happened.
Okay.
That if they call social services, they could see you as an unfit parent for not affirming them, and that you're causing them harm, is the words they use.
Got it. Okay. So the official position is affirm, and that's it. You weren't told about any other options.
No.
Okay.
And nobody will do like a evaluation or therapy. They just affirm. It's just one size fits all. They don't care if you have other comorbidities or anything else going on. All they care about is affirming the trans and pushing them down the medicalization route.
And were you at any point encouraged to give feedback about how he was before, or was anyone receptive to that in this process, or was it kind of like you were just cut out of the discussion right away?
You're cut out, and they don't care about any past. They just the kid they say the kid knows themselves better than you do, and that's the bottom line.
And so, how are things going? How has this progressed? What have you decided to do faced with this situation?
Well, the first thing we did is, I was an emotional wreck. I had to get my help for myself, and once I got help for myself, then I could help him. We got him on. He did not have gender dysphoria or depression before he told us, and then after he told us, all of a sudden he heavily depressed and claimed he had gender dysphoria. So we got a psychiatrist that was not affirming. He really didn't do anything, but he gave him antidepressants, and I also went on the same antidepressant, so I knew what to expect, and it helped me. It took away my anxiety, and then I went off, and I kept encouraging my son that he could go off too, because he stopped having gender dysphoria and he stopped having depression, and he has gone off, and he's really happy. Like he's like his old self again. He's not depressed. He's really happy. He struggles with. He's socially awkward, so he does struggle with friends, but he's really good, except he still says he's going to transition.
Okay. So he's now gone. He's not questioning. He's convinced. He's still convinced of
Yeah.
this.
And so what we do is we just work on our relationship with him, hoping that our influence will win out.
Okay.
He's really happy. He loves us. He loves our home. He has also decided that he doesn't want to go to college right away. He wants to go to community college and wants to live at home. And I have said that I will not support him having doing hormones at home, because I have told him all the risks, and I don't support that. And if he wants to do hormones, he cannot live at home, because I won't be able to handle it, because I know that it's not good for him.
And you've been very upfront with him about all this. You've said the same things to him that you're telling us.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How does he respond, if you don't mind my asking, when you share this with him?
He says, I won't do that, but I will one day, is now what he's saying, which I feel like it's buying me some time.
Got it. Okay.
But I also need him to be independent and grow up and be on his own. So it's kind of a tricky. But I know that colleges are so affirming. The hormones are readily available at all the health centers on campus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with no note, just say I'm trans. They give you the hormones. Like they're passed out like candy. It's incredible.
Wow. And you don't have any recourse, even
No,
though your son is still a minor child.
not right now. No.
Okay. And
Especially we live in California, so you know we have very little rights.
yeah. Okay. And is he speaking with anyone officially sort of for counseling to talk about his feelings, or mostly you're working with him through it and talking about it?
Well, we did have a therapist who he had seen when he was younger, when he was struggling, and this therapist we thought was on our side and trying to help us. But then I overheard him say some things like, "One day your mom will accept you as her daughter, and that your mom." This was the therapist, and the therapist said, "And your mom is just only reading anti-trans stuff," to my
Wow.
son, and that was the last appointment he had with him. And my son doesn't want to have a therapist, and they say no therapist is better than a bad therapist, so we're not doing therapy right now. Um, I'm hoping that he grows up and maybe one day he'll listen to some of the information I can give him,
Right.
but that's all I can do right now.
Right.
He at the time he decided he was trans, he had a friend who thought the same thing. They don't go to the same school,
Mm-hmm.
the same high school, and this boy has been on hormones since for a year now. So, and he talks to him daily. So, I don't have a lot of room to convince him he's not trans when he has this friend that is doing it.
Got it. Okay. Well, I know that I've already seen some comments that people they're with you and supporting you, and I think you're very brave to come and share your story, because this has got to be hard to talk about. I mean, it's hard, I imagine, to go through it and live it, but to even keep repeating it, it's probably a difficult thing. But as a mom, I obviously, my heart goes out to you, because I don't know what I would do. I really don't. So I think let's hear from, let's see, Dee.
Yes.
Are you there? Okay, so we're going to hear your story now and see if what's.
Well, thank you,
Are you
Deb.
okay? I'm sorry if you weren't ready.
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for having us. And yes, it is a difficult conversation to have. And I think at the end of all this, we're going to find that there's a lot of similarities. So in my situation, we have a 17-year-old daughter who has identified as trans for close to 2 years now. And it's something that happened in a matter of weeks. She went from boy crazy to bi. Bi came out after the gay pride parade at the high school. And then within weeks was gay. And then literally within weeks was trans. There was a friend who was very influential in this process. And I found out how influential just a few months later when I hacked into my daughter's phone. But by way of background, we adopted both of our children from China. And when we adopted her, when they placed her in my arms, she was 13 months old, but only weighed 15 pounds and could not hold a bottle and could not crawl. And so we thought her arm was broken. And then the toddler years, when I brought her home, I had her seen by a doctor in New York who specializes in this and said she was a failure to thrive baby and that we got her just in time. She might not have made it another month or so. The next few years were filled with night terrors and flashbacks, very vivid flashbacks of seeing beds in the orphanage for the new babies. You know, she's had anxiety over the years, more like a palpable sense of abandonment, which I thought we were working on. But, you know, once puberty hit, became somewhat socially awkward. She is diminutive in size, and that bothers her. And she's maxed out at 5.5 feet tall. She's not going to get any taller than that, and that bothers her. So over the years, though, we've noticed that if she has taken to a particular friend, she develops the characteristics and the clothing of the friend. And so that happened in this case. This new friend from high school, when I met her, the hair on my neck went up, and I couldn't figure out why. And now I know why. But almost 2 years ago, when she came out as trans, she really, just like Claire mentioned, started having anxiety and panic attacks and depression, and then suicidal ideation. The first therapist, and we had no idea what rapid onset gender dysphoria was at the time. I think Google specifically blocked me from figuring it out for 6 months, but took her to a therapist who, on the fourth visit, demanded that I take her to the suicide unit, which this was totally out of my wheelhouse. I did what I was told.
Sure.
And they discharged her in 22 hours. And fortunately, they did not affirm, but psychiatrist there said definitely this was what she called a chameleon complex, and it was related to her adoptee status. So got her out of there, and I thought, okay, but then got a new therapist, and within 3 months, by January 2020, I felt like this wasn't working, and I hacked into my daughter's phone, and I was shocked and profoundly disturbed by the screenshots. I downloaded 300 of them, of the dialogue between her and this friend who exposed her to lesbian porn and Tumblr. And then my daughter was making up stuff about me, that I forced her to wear corsets, so I forced her to wear pink. And the friend's response, and I won't use the actual verbiage, but, you know, the F-bomb was dropped quite a bit in reference to me and the word hate. But I was called a gaslighter, a trauma bonder, textbook abusive. And then I was stunned when I read that her friends' mothers all had a safe house for her. So, and I go to church with some of these people. So I contacted the mother of this child, and I didn't really know her, but I met her for coffee and told her what the story was and what I had seen. And she confirmed for me that she thought my child did live in an abusive home. And then I developed a pretty good rapport with the mother after that. I then found another therapist who was even worse. She affirmed her on the same day as she met her when she told us she wasn't going to. And then in March of 2020, I came upon Lisa Littman's study on rapid onset gender dysphoria. And I mean, it just opened up my eyes, and I just went, bingo, that's it. That's it. This is what we have. I couldn't read enough on it. And then Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, which I highly recommend. To me, that was the tipping point in terms of me meeting these wonderful people that you have on your show, meeting with the founder of what is now genspect.org, Dr. Stella O'Malley. And I started meeting up with other parents, and I realized I was not alone. I did meet with Sasha Ayad. I had a phone consult with her in April of 2020. And at the same time, I had found a psychologist who specialized in body dysmorphia and anorexia, and these have a lot of similarities with the trans craze. This woman's been fantastic applying cognitive behavioral therapy. I've seen some improvement in emotional, in terms of dealing with day-to-day stresses, but as with Claire's son, we cannot have a conversation about college with our child. She actually breaks down, and the doctor has diagnosed her with pre-adoption trauma and a fear of growing up. And she also confirmed for us, which she wasn't willing to do last year. Okay. She has a lot of these kids on her plate. And so she doesn't come out and affirm, but she doesn't deny. And just last month, she said she's not transgender. She just has a fear of growing up. So I'm 5 months away from 18 years old when I lose control over this. As with Claire, we are trying to maintain and work on the relationship to keep a peaceful home and a happy home and a loving home. And I'm hoping that love will win at the end of the day. In terms of the school, I found out that she had, in fact, come up with a male name a year ago. Well, I went to the guidance counselor and the teachers, and I told them by email, please don't do it. She's vulnerable, and they wanted a meeting. I couldn't believe it. I'm in a public school with 2,400 kids. And this is new to me because I was raised in Catholic. I've had 19 years of Catholic education. Somehow I survived. Okay. But but they met with us, and I explained about the whole situation, about when she was placed in my arms. And they would not accommodate us completely. They wanted a compromise. So the compromise was use her initials or use her last name, but there's no need for the male name. So they accommodated us there. The school has no policy on this, none whatsoever. But I did have to go before the school board. I felt compelled to do so, to tell them that this is what's going on and that parents are losing their authority, and that an education is not a good education where parents are not respected or involved or informed. I really was adamant about that. So I learned that there are states that have laws that prohibit parents from knowing that if they do find out that the school board attorney has to be retained to render an opinion as to whether or not the parent is violating the children's civil rights. I mean, this is.
Did everybody hear that? I want to make sure everybody caught that. That
Yeah.
if you challenge this, right?
If the parents challenge, because they're not allowed to know, but if they find out and they challenge, school has to hire its attorney to render an opinion as to whether the parents are violating the child's civil rights. And it's under the guise of a law against discrimination. If you can wrap your head around that, just let that sit there for a moment or two.
This is your state's statute, correct?
It's that's a statute that exists in the state of New Jersey. I don't live there, but I as I'm doing my research,
Right.
I found another place in the state of Florida, in a county, where a mother was told it was a school board policy. And I looked it up. I have a legal background, and I called the mother and said, no, there is no such policy on the school's website. It's not on the board's website. Turns out a director of student affairs hijacked one precatory paragraph from a school board policy on the health, safety, and welfare of the child and morphed it into, and if you don't affirm them, they will commit suicide. So they must wear their own clothes, their own pronouns, and don't tell the parents. And I wrote a letter on behalf of the mother to the director. And I'm sure that the director didn't want the board to know that she was doing this. So she agreed to meet with the mother, and she reluctantly agreed to the mother's request, but then demanded that the mother familiarize herself with quote unquote Florida equality. So that's the kind of thing that's also going on. I mean, it's leaving the parents out of the dialogue and letting the inmates, the proverbial inmates, run the asylum.
And what's interesting to me is a theme I'm sort of picking up on already is some awkwardness, some feelings of anxiety and, general around issues of growing up, maturation, moving on, becoming an adult, things like that. Do you think the way schools currently teach sex ed, gender, all these issues contributes as well? I know that the friend is a big factor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the curriculum influences it?
I do. And I'm not quite sure. She was in a private school before high school. So I knew what was going on there. I don't know what's going on in this school. And I didn't, because I don't have experience in the public school system, I naively trusted the school because I knew their academics were outstanding. And I just didn't see this coming. I just didn't see it coming. And I would say to anybody that with children, there are a couple things you can do. One is read a very good book called Hold On to Your Kids by Gordon Neufeld. It talks about how children are becoming increasingly peer-oriented, so that, children are becoming children's parents. The friends are becoming parents. But that was an eye-opener for me. And then take a look at how your school is teaching these subjects. I really believe, especially when there's a Gay Street Alliance allowed on campus. That's just like the pathway to this situation.
And is this the name? Did I get it correct?
Yes, that's it. Hold On to Your Kids. Highly recommend it. I not only read it, but I've listened to it on Audible. I just couldn't get enough out of it. And it helped me with our current situation in terms of reclaiming my child from the immature usurper who had her on 300 screenshots, diagnosing me as textbook abusive.
It sounds like emotional abuse from that person.
Yes, especially with the exposure to lesbian porn. That's also, to me, that was abusive.
Yeah. People, I don't think of other children as being abusers or other children as being groomers. But when you're starting to get into teen years, as you said, if they're peer sensitive, and I read long ago that once a child is over 16 in particular, but sometimes it can be as early as 13, they get about 60% of their worldview and point of view and things like that from their peers, from their social sphere.
And if I can add one more thing, the mother of the immature usurper, as I call her, she and I have had a couple of good conversations, and we recently came upon another book by Maria Keffler called Desist, Detrans, and Detox: How to Get Your Child Out of the Transgender Craze. And the mother said to me, because we were also coincidentally reading a book by Stephen Hassan, who's a cult expert. And the mother said, "Why were you reading that book?" I said, "Because I think this is a cult." And she said, "It is. I would know because I was in one." And she said, "I think I need to keep my daughter away from yours. She's obviously a very bad influence on her. And she's a bad influence on her siblings. And she's a bad influence on her cousin." Wow. So this kid is very charismatic.
They exist. It doesn't just pop up when they're adults, So I'm going to write that. I just went to look up the spelling to make sure I got it correct.
Keffler, Keffler.
Okay. These are great resources. Thank you for sharing this. Is there anything else that you would like people to know from the perspective that you just shared with us?
I just think that you can't just flat out let the schools usurp your power and your authority over your child. There's even Supreme Court precedent that talks about the parents' rights to educate the child as they see fit. And I'll also caution, you're not safe in a private school setting either. I recently heard from a mother whose child's in a Catholic school, and they have told the mother they're affirming the kid. And so, so now she's got to go to the Archbishop. And then basically said, if you don't like it, take your child out of here. So, you can't make this up, folks. You really can't make this up.
No words. But this is so important. I know I'm going to say it like a bunch more before we're done, but thank you so much for sharing this, because even as close to the ground as I keep my ear about schools and different issues, this is outside of, we're not hearing the truth. We're hearing one very narrow point of view that even those of us who disagree, like instinctively say, this is wrong. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't align with reality, right? We don't have access to the details of what's going on in individual lives. And I think that's what's missing. People need to know the other side of this. Thank you so much, Dee, for sharing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb.
All right. I will leave it to the two remaining parents who would like to go next, Peavy or Glenn. If you want to just let me know who's ready.
I'm happy to jump in, Glenn, if that's okay with you.
Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Peavy. I have a 17-year-old daughter who is 5 years into this now. I live in California. I'm a librarian, and I'm also a former school board member. And so I actually had some of the trans training before my daughter did. And I didn't know that she was going to get it. I thought that this was something that was really just for adults. But when my daughter entered junior high school, She joined with some friends a gay straight alliance. I thought it was a really positive thing. You've already heard from Dee, I think, talking about it. Gay straight alliances are wonderful. They can be very positive things. Right now, they tend to be really inculcated with gender ideology. What I didn't know was that this outside trainer from a trans support group was coming in and essentially at these club meetings telling the kids that pretty normal adolescent feelings and behaviors, the way you feel disconnected from your body is changing, you may not be interested in the same things that a lot of your same-sex peers are, that they may mean that you have a different gender identity. And when I got the training, I really understood this very naively as something that came up in young children. I had no idea at that point because there hadn't quite yet been this adolescent explosion. And so at 13, at the beginning of her 8th grade year, my daughter came to me and said, I think I'm trans. And it was really out of the blue. I have 2 older sons. And my daughter actually has always, behaved in ways that are more stereotypically feminine. And one of the things that I did, and I saw this come up in the comments, is that I asked her, what do you mean you feel like a boy? What does it mean to feel like a boy? And actually, she was the one that raised the first red flags for me because she couldn't describe it. And then when she asked me, very confrontationally, like, how am I different from my brothers? And, I've had, 2 13-year-old boys in the past. And then I had this 13-year-old girl. I'm like, here are some really explicit ways that you are quite different from your brothers. And she was shocked and horrified. And yet, she doesn't see it that way. And what I found over time is that in California, over the past 5 years or so, this way of thinking about gender identity has really been inculcated at the state level. So it's in our state level curriculum now. And I've had the training, so I understand that if you haven't really thought about it critically, that it's very easy to get fooled by it. You think you understand what they're saying. Superficially, there is kind of like, oh, I can kind of wrap my arms around that, and that kind of makes sense. It's only when you start to question it and when it comes up in your own life and you see, oh, actually, this doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. And now I look at the curriculum, like the health education curriculum in California that is coming out. They look to typically private organizations to create these, they're often LGBT organizations that have created the curriculum that it then goes through a state approval or at least a state kind of checkoff list. But they're teaching 5, 6, 7-year-olds that, remind students that some girls are born with different kinds of bodies, and a girl can have a male body and things like that. That they're teaching that at a very young age. So it's not even like by the time you're talking at the junior high level now, these kids will have gotten years of this curriculum if the teacher decides to actually bring it into the classroom. That's what the curricula says.
So they're making it sound like being intersex is sort of common.
Oh, they explicitly say intersex is common, but they're also talking about trans identity. So what they're trying to get at is that you can't define male and female. That doesn't mean boy and girl. They're really trying to push the idea that gender is a spectrum, that you may be born in a different body than what you identify as. And it's starting really, really young. And so when I look back on it, my big regrets are that it was first so hard to find information. And my day job is I'm a librarian, so I'm good at research, but man, talk about the Google algorithm. It is so hard at first. I think it's much easier now. And parents can do some things to protect their kids by being really explicit about this is what you're going to hear at school. This is actually just a belief, just the way some people believe in this religion or that religion.
Or the earth is flat.
or the earth is flat. There's lots of different ways that people believe, and you can be kind and supportive without actually believing this. It's because it's not true. You can protect kids to a certain extent from that, but when you're talking about little kids that are getting this repeatedly at school, and then from their peers, I really think that all kids are at risk. And I think if you're a parent of an elementary or junior high age kid, and you've never seen it in your kid, and you think, I'm okay, this is something that happens to other people, please don't be fooled. If your kid is going to school in the United States today, anywhere, and if your kid is on the internet is a huge factor, then your kid is at risk. And in fact, with my child's Gay Straight Alliance, 5 girls out of that group ended up identifying as trans over the next 2 years.
Now you have a unique perspective in that you have served on a school board and had that sort of insight from the other side a little bit. It came up in the comments a while back. What do you think is in it for the schools? Like, what is the incentive to be doing this?
They really, and you know, I want to be clear that I don't think it's with any evil intention. They really think that they're being kind and inclusive, and this is the way to be kind and inclusive. They don't understand that teaching it this way makes every kid, like, one of the things that you'll see all over the place is people putting pronouns in their email signatures or in their bios and things like that. When you do that constantly, and you'll see some trans people actually push back against that, because it makes kids constantly question, like, so what is this thing, gender identity? Why should I be worried about this? They're worried about many things as they're entering adolescence, and this adds a layer of stress and complication to their lives. And I know that teachers and administrators don't mean to do this. It is what they're being taught. It's what I was being taught as adults. And then they're being kind and inclusive and bringing it into the school curriculum. And it just is expanding and exacerbating this problem and creating a trans identity that may have shown up, like they may have had stress, mental health issues in other ways. They may be OCD or anorexic, or kids that have, ways that they hate their bodies. It's a very common thing for adolescents to do. And this ends up being like, oh, this is what it is. This is the answer to my problems. If I have drugs and surgery, then that will solve everything for me. And it's a huge challenge. And I think until our school systems start to recognize that they're part of the problem, and that actually they're harming these kids, that in their adult lives will be very limited in some ways, then until they get their arms around that, it is not. This is not a problem that's going to go away. And I really appreciate the resources that other parents here have mentioned so far. I think that they are really important and terrific, and that parents who don't have kids that are affected at this point, you need to be paying attention, because it really could be your kid next.
Right. Known Heretic has mentioned in the comments here, I want to get this up on the screen, I hope it's not too far back, that there is, here, after Biden's EO, they can't receive federal funding unless they go along with the new curriculum, like Equality Act or something. I think there's, it's a federal mandate.
Executive order.
It's executive order. Okay. Federal mandate, any org receives federal funding. So, I understand what you're saying about it. There's not like malicious, but it sounds like that also feeds it too, that there's money tied to this.
Well, there is money tied to it, but as Dee already said, this is pervasive in the private school system as well. This is, okay. It is, it is really everywhere right now. And so
I wonder if it's like, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Mm-hmm. I was just going to ask, I wonder if it's sort of like how some people feel, let's say about buying software, like no one ever got fired for buying Microsoft. Well, that's what everyone's doing. And we're told the kind thing to do. And we don't want to rock the boat. We want to do what is the current prevailing wisdom, if you will. So let's
Yes.
go with that.
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
most of these people are not experts in any of this, right?
Right.
So if that appears to be what everybody's doing, I think it's easy to get the impression that it's correct, that there's
Yes.
something scientific behind it or whatever.
Absolutely. And in the US, it's very different. Like if you look across the Atlantic to the United Kingdom, they had parent organizations spring up pretty quickly that started to fight the curriculum. They have like alternative curriculum. They have like a Safe Schools Alliance. And the US is just actually years behind the UK on this. And without that alternative messaging, schools, I think, just go to what's easiest and what they think is literally factual and true without understanding what they're doing.
Got it. Well, wow. So at this point, where are things with your daughter? Like, how are things going currently? If you want to share, you don't have to.
Yeah, no, she'll be 18 in January. Like the others, I too just really work on the relationship. Like Claire, we know we have boundaries about medication and what she'll need to be responsible for, and what we will not pay for an adult child to take medications. That is something that we we know it's harmful for her physically, and as her parents, we can't support that. But we support her in every way except that. And we all are quite close to each other. And I know that she knows that we love her. And that is foundational to keeping a relationship into the future.
Right, right. Well, we will all be, hoping and praying for the best for you and your daughter in that respect. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Glenn, would you like to share? Hi.
Yeah, sure. I would second a lot of the comments, in particular with respect to people seeming to have your best interest at heart whenever they're saying they're being kind by affirming. But I can't emphasize enough how big of a mistake that can be. From our perspective, my wife's and mine, it all started for us about 6 months ago, whenever our oldest, who was 17 at the time — we have two boys, 17 at the time, very straight-laced, incredibly nerdy, socially awkward, but just like the nice.
Are you there? I think your connection is breaking up a bit.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So, like many of the parents, what our experience was it was a Friday night. We were sitting down to family dinner. We were going to watch a movie together in the continuing, ongoing coronavirus lockdowns. And our oldest, who was 17, 2 months shy of his 18th birthday, had told us, I want to tell you and mom and my brother something tonight. And we thought it was maybe that he had made some decisions around college. We thought maybe it related to some things that he had been discussing with a therapist, because he had been, frankly, in the midst of the corona lockdowns, growing very anxious, locking himself into his room, and he'd never been that way, and growing increasingly depressed. So whenever he said, "Mom, Dad, I'm trans," I basically dropped my fork, my jaw dropped. There's no indication whatsoever that you would have ever thought of yourself possibly as a girl before that. And I largely went into a fugue as he started reciting, basically his prepared speech related to, well, here's the reasons why, I dress sloppy, but, and I played with boy toys. I loved Thomas the Tank Engine and Hot Wheels as a kid, but I really liked this Disney princess one time, and so on. And it was largely like it was pulled information off of the internet in hindsight of trying to recreate your story of having been a pure boy from a very early age, and looking for literally any exception to the rule. And you know, I went into a dynamic.
We're not hearing you still. I think you're still breaking up.
Sorry about that. Let me see if I can. I'll switch. Let me see if I can switch to a different microphone.
Okay. Or if you want to, you can just speak without the headphones and the mic if that will work, unless, because it can work and there is echo canceling. It might not be okay. That's up to you. While he's doing that, PV, I just wanted to clarify, where are you located state-wise currently?
California.
So you're in California, Claire's in California, D is
South Carolina.
South Carolina, currently, correct. Okay, just for the audience, in case they missed the locations, want to make sure everybody understands that this is widespread. It's not just localized into any one state or region. This is a phenomenon that parents are seeing all over the place. Also, it should be mentioned, because this is my channel and I am very pro homeschool. Everybody knows that about me. But when it comes to this issue, this can happen to any child. As I mentioned, if they have the internet, they have access to the internet, this can happen. This is, as we know, it's all over in the culture. So even homeschool children have, been vulnerable to these kinds of things. I want to make sure I mention that. Nothing is a panacea, not private,
Right.
not homeschool. You as a parent have to be very much engaged in your kids, what they're doing, what they're consuming as far as cultural output, and also their friends.
And if I may add one more thing, to watch their social media activity. Mine has been following a plastic surgeon who glamorizes mastectomies of healthy breasts with TikTok videos on Instagram.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Is this the gender surgeon? Is it that woman?
Yeah.
Yep. Learned about her yesterday.
My daughter's been following her for almost 2 years.
Yeah, that's there. I really think we need to get some, organization going for even possibly legislation, because I really think this falls under grooming. We're talking about minor children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my understanding that in the past, the Supreme Court has even weighed in on certain kinds of like questionnaires in schools that they're not supposed to ask because it constitutes grooming. I think that licensed medical professionals need to be held to similar standards.
I agree.
So, oh, poor Glenn.
Hi, Deb, are you able to hear me now?
No, it's quite distorted, actually. So the microphone won't work. No?
Hi, Deb, are you able to hear me now?
No, I'm sorry. I think it was actually better with the headphones, if you're able to go back to them. That's my fault. I thought it would be okay, but I guess it's not.
Here we go. Is that better?
That is better.
There
Okay,
we go.
let's try
Sorry.
that.
Sorry, I'm working from a vacation house at the moment, so I wasn't
All right.
set up here appropriately like at home. But as I was saying, from literally day one, we did not affirm. It's been 6 months now for us in terms of dealing with this with our older, as well as what we later found out was our younger as well, who's 14. So on day one, whenever the 18-year-old quote unquote came out as trans, and our younger one had just kind of a very strange reaction at dinner that night, where it wasn't like, oh, I'm shocked that my older brother is saying this. Instead, it was like kind of shifty eyes and, oh no, they're coming after me. And it turns out that he had been presenting himself separately as a girl. Now with the older, I immediately went into a large panic, because read very extensively. I was familiar, at least in passing, with some of the materials that were brought up, like the Abby Schreier book, as well as the study that was cited in there. I didn't remember the name at the time, but I knew there was a study related to it. And after reading that again in more detail, the Lisa Littman study. But really, from our perspective, we've gone from 6 months. In that 6-month time frame, we're on day 1, or day 2 technically. Day 2, our older son was demanding that we change his name, that he wanted us, or his mother in particular, to give him a new female name, because, quote, she had always wanted a daughter and now I want to be that for her. He wanted a new name. He immediately wanted us to take him in for hormones, and he told us he wanted to cut his penis off. And in a 6-month time frame, we've gone from that to him, after not affirming, pushing back, lots of, frankly, fights, heated arguments, of him now saying, oh, yeah, I was being ridiculous with that. And it was, all I can say is that I think what is getting mistaken within the school system, within guidance psychiatrists, etc., for these teens, is that being kind, being polite, accepting whatever someone is saying at the outset is not love. And I've told him that repeatedly throughout this point in time, throughout this, is that, you know, you want us to give you a new name and you want us to take you in for something that you think is the absolute thing that you need this moment. And I'm telling you that that's you're telling me.
It's breaking up again. Glenn, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. So you were explaining that that wouldn't be loving to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And in that amount of time, so in a very short period of time, we've gone from someone that was demanding hormones and demanding that we take him in for surgeries to remove his penis, to someone that's now embracing his body, is now working out regularly. I mean, he never was going to possibly pass as a female. He looks very similar to myself, with a fairly trim, athletic, masculine body, and is now embracing that. You know, and I asked myself, you know, if we had from day one, like so many individuals have, the reflexive instinct of doing, is to be kind, look at things that are allowing you to choose your own pronouns. It sends you immediately down this, sends you down a path that's very difficult to come back from. How do you one day go, oh, well, yes, I told you yesterday I want to have estrogen and have body enhancing surgeries to become, quote, a woman, and now, oh, well, now I'm a boy. How do you make that switch without looking like, frankly, a buffoon? Whenever you're saying on one day, oh, I'm going to absolutely change everything about myself, to the next day saying, no, I'm not going to change anything about myself. You know, it's a very difficult path to go down and reverse from. It just sets you down one path, in my viewpoint.
Right. Well, I don't think it's comparable necessarily, so I'm not bringing this up, you know, to compare, but it's like the only thing I can think of as for an analogy to what you're saying right now, as far as like how to respond. My daughter suffered from anorexia, and, you know, she would say things to me like, why can't you just let me do what I want? And can anyone hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Why can't you just let me be myself? Why can't I? This is me, and this is who I am. And I, you know, to her reality was that she was not dangerously thin, right? That she was not killing herself. And no matter the difference, of course, being that there I had doctors kind of on my side eventually. But in her mind, that was her reality. And why can't you just let me do it? And even after going through residential treatment and all kinds of things, still was sliding back into that and saying, well, what if I just diet a little bit? Or what if I just, and it would never occur to me to say, sure, I affirm your identity as an anorexic. I affirm your identity as a person with an eating disorder. You can go ahead and continue doing this because you feel like that's who you are. But why would I do that? That's sort of more obviously unhealthy. But I think when someone has distorted thinking, which is very clear what you're describing, that's what we're hearing, right? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't go along with the distortion as parents. That wouldn't be loving. The loving thing would be to challenge that perception, that pseudo reality, and remind them of reality, the facts, if you will. And that's that's at least what I'm hearing, is that, parents might want to take some courage in that. Am I making sense, or am I way off in left field?
That makes absolute sense.
Yep.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, with our younger, who we found out later,
It's breaking up again. Sorry. So you're saying about your younger child?
Yeah, the younger child, who's 14. Within his school, there's always been a very athletic-y clique of boys. It's a relatively small school, so he's always hung out with probably about 2/3 girls and maybe 1/3 boys. And within that group, bear in mind we're talking about a small Catholic school, they've collectively, as I found out, as we've now dug into all of the messages and the internet searches and so on, you've got a pan, a bi, a trans, a non-binary, a gay, one that's questioning. So you've got 7 or 8 kids that are the panoply of being something other than hetero. And with the younger one, it struck us that it's been kind of adopted as a pet in a way. He went down this very internet rabbit hole with some of the girls that presented him with questionnaires on Reddit and so on, where he started taking those quizzes, and it said, oh, you're trans. So it was presented effectively like, oh, I take a questionnaire. I've done the questionnaire myself, by the way, and I score higher as a trans than he does.
Wow.
So I said that to him. I said, do I seem even remotely trans to you? And got the blank stare of no. I said, well, here's where I score. Where do you score on that same one? It's a lot of very loaded questions that children, frankly, don't question or push back, and they're not thinking.
It's breaking
dresses. They were giving him dresses, skirts, so on, that he would slip into late at night. He managed to get an admin password. I always shut down the computers at night, at least on his password. But then he got an admin password from it for the computer and was logging in the middle of the night to then put on the dress with the other girl that their parents didn't have the computers locked down at all. They'd have, various sexting back and forth. I mean, it was absolutely preposterous. So whenever, he had his brother have this declaration of being trans, then they kind of ganged up on us in a way, in that it was, here's my sister right next door in the room next door. I didn't know I had a sister all along, and it was, effectively we needed a divide and conquer approach with the two of them. At that point, separating them as much as possible. I think the underlying situations with both were pretty substantively different in that the older had genuinely fallen into a deep state of depression. The younger one kind of got caught up with a friend group at school that decided, oh, you're very effeminate and you like to hang out with girls. Take this test and you're going to find that you're trans, and now we're going to get you some clothing to go along with that, so that you can sneak around at night and dress in that with us on the computer video chats. It was a very challenging several months for all this.
Oh, sorry.
All along, my older son had one therapist because he was being treated with depression at the time, who he had said to her, oh, I'm trans, and then she encouraged him to come out to us as parents. With that, we immediately broke off that relationship with that therapist. She called us in a panic and said, oh, he really needs my help. And we said, we already know about the trans declaration to you, and we're done with you. Goodbye. And broke that off. We subsequently did do some family therapy very successfully, non-affirming with both of them, that we found that we needed to finally separate the two of them into two different groups because they would kind of play off of one another within the group. But in the process of all of the non-affirmation, I would say that, they've, in both instances, desisted. They've both, in different ways. The younger was the first, where we said, listen, we're just going to do a move. We're moving elsewhere. We want to get you closer to some family. We didn't really live close to very much family at all.
Right.
Got set up. He now has his younger cousins to play with that are very nearby, a short bike ride or a slightly longer walk from one another. And, in the process of doing that, it was not, our expectation from a 14-year-old was, oh, we're, going to get a lot of pushback. And his reaction was, all right, yeah, let's move. It wasn't missing the friends at all. It wasn't anything along those lines. He simply said, yeah, let's do that. And I think that change has been very necessary for presenting myself as a girl. I'm going to move into the girls' dorm. Meanwhile, fascinating about all of the girls that he's liked and had crushes on over the years. I think in our cases, it came about seated as a degree of depression with the older, and probably being caught up within schools and friend groups of wanting to fit in by being alternative in one fashion or another.
Right.
Can I jump in and ask Glenn a question? Because he has two sisters. And what I know from my daughter is that if and when she ever realizes that her body is her body, I think the hardest thing for her will be the idea of I was wrong. I was wrong. My parents didn't affirm me, and the idea of her parents being right and her being wrong, I think that in and of itself is such a huge barrier for an adolescent. And I wonder, Glenn, if you have any wise words about that.
Yeah, and I mean that was my fear from the outset. It was, if we went down this path, if I gave even an inch to either one of them, that we were going to get in that sort of circumstance. Now with us, effectively, I wanted to that I viewed it as wolf from.
Glenn.
Can't hear him. I really wanted to hear that.
Yeah, we
Oh,
didn't hear you.
I was saying
Couldn't hear
I
that
wanted
at all.
I wanted to create a golden bridge for them to retreat over. Sun Tzu, Art of War. And
What is?
I'm sorry, what was that, Deb?
Can you explain what you mean by a golden bridge?
So what I mean by that is that the concept is, if you don't want to battle someone head on, is that you build them a very attractive way in order to back away from that. And from our perspective, because we weren't going to affirm even one iota from day one, it was a matter of creating as loving of an environment as we could, while emphasizing that, listen, everyone says, to my older son, everyone says, you look exactly like me, you walk exactly like me. We can't see that we walk exactly alike because we're right next to each other. We both have trim, fairly athletic physiques. You're not going to ever, do you think I would ever pass as your mother, son? And getting responses like, no. And then researching and understanding and looking at a lot of the influences that he was looking at, in particular a lot of very cultish anime, as I think, Deb, you'll find a lot of kids that become trans-identified get into for one reason or another. And I started looking at some of those materials myself. I started looking at the games, the video games he was playing.
Okay, we're breaking up again. I just want to make sure we don't miss any of this important.
He was playing a game called Celeste. It's a very anime oriented game. You win the game, the person at the end has this transformative experience throughout, and then plants a giant trans flag at the top of the mountain whenever you win. I had no idea. I had no idea. This is a video game, teen 14 or whatever the rating is. It's not even a teen. It's not even an MA style rating on such a video game, written by a trans-identified the media director of that video game is that. And I said to him, I'm looking at the anime that you're watching, I'm looking at the video games that you're watching, and I think, frankly, I've now read 20 books at that point on the subject of gender dysphoria from all sides. And I said, by process of elimination, I actually think, and here's what I think you think you're going to turn into not a woman, but one of these anime characters. And through a very heated discussion, he broke down and said, there's a lot of truth to that. Yes, that is what I'm seeing. And I said, no matter what someone has told you in terms of changing from being a man to a woman, you're certainly never going to turn into a video game character with size triple D breasts that you're enamored with. That they're hypersexualized, yet also strangely androgynous at the same time. A lot of the anime, you're not going to ever turn into that.
You're breaking up again.
It's just a path that they sink down, while at the same time trying to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
and also saying, listen, here's the paths that some people potentially could go down
Mm-hmm.
where they don't look like a woman, but they may call themselves a woman.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, that's who you potentially could turn into. You're certainly not going to turn into this anime character, however.
Right. Right. Now, as far as do any of you, this is a question kind of for anybody in the panel. Could you identify, were there any sort of precipitating events that perhaps contributed to your child's sense of increased vulnerability or needing to find this kind of identity? Or do you think there's any other common denominator in them, whether it's personality or just something that what might have contributed? And I'm asking with a purpose because I've heard that there are kids who are some kids who are either ADD or on the spectrum can be more vulnerable. Kids who have been bullied can be more vulnerable. Kids who are just starting off in a position where they're already a little bit more vulnerable socially as they come into their teen years, maybe, so nothing's a given, right? But maybe vulnerable in this situation. Is that something you have noticed? Or
I think because I have a Chinese child living in a white family in a very homogenous area of the country, I think the fact that she looks different, even though we also subsequently adopted another child from China, but I think that played into it quite a bit. She has done self-portraits of herself. She's very artistic, and they're white boys with blonde hair and blue eyes. That's her self-portrait. So, the social awkwardness. Now, it's interesting. The Netherlands reported last year that the first wave of these girls were Chinese adoptees.
interesting.
And then followed by girls on the autism spectrum. And the girl who took her down the rabbit hole, I believe, is on the spectrum.
Okay.
So I think it was my daughter's desire to fit in, really, that prompted this.
Okay. And that's something all adolescents feel, I think. I mean, that's just a common theme in adolescence, right? You're going through that process of sort of pulling away from your family of origin and trying to figure out where you fit in the world of that you're going to, the grown-up world, but you're not quite there yet. So it's kind of like a push me, pull you sort of a game. And I think all children from their like maybe 11 years of age all the way to 18 are vulnerable to outside influences when it comes to creating or, identifying who they are, building that sense of identity. Somebody in the chat mentioned boundaries. And that's something that I've talked about a lot on my channel, that I am very concerned about the adults in our children's lives, whether they're on the internet or in schools or clubs or therapists, doctors, etc. The adults other than parents seem to me to have a very bizarre sense of like it's perfectly okay to violate the emotional and intellectual boundaries of someone else's minor child, whether by asking very, very personal questions of them or by encouraging them to question things their parents have told them. And we've talked about grooming, but I think this is even kind of beyond grooming. It's something we might have before called rude, just straight up rude, right? This, like, who are you to ask me these questions, or what, like, that is none of your business. But yet it's now being kind of soft pedaled as empathy or social emotional learning, or let's share. And there's this encouraging, let's share all our innermost thoughts about everything, so that if you don't have something to share, right?
Right.
I think Claire dropped off. You might feel left out of the sharing. So then you kind of almost want to come up with something, if that makes sense, right?
There is that. And just to circle back on what you were talking about in terms of common themes, if you have a kid there's many different kind of roots here, but I think that if you have a kid that for whatever reason tends to ruminate, tends to think obsessively about something, then you have a kid that's at risk. And so my kid has trichotillomania, which is on the kind of OCD spectrum, hair pulling disorder. and can ruminate on that. And I think that if it's common with ADHD. It's actually really common with eating disorders, Deb. There's a real big crossover between trans and eating disorders. It's common in all of the autism spectrum. So I think that is what I would look at. I think if you have a kid who's a worrier, somebody who just thinks obsessively about things, and this is the one thing, especially as you were mentioning, Deb, when people keep bringing it up and keep asking and talking about it, it makes you wonder, it makes you question, and it makes you think about it again and again and again.
Yeah. I mean, my daughter, the one that suffers ED, although she is in recovery now, she's one I would classify as having a lot of these. She's got Asperger's, and she has a lot of these sort of obsessive behaviors and tics and things. And I never would have guessed that she had any desire to fit in. She was always sort of an iconoclast from the time she was a toddler, and never showed any signs of needing or wanting that. Just seemed very comfortable in her own skin. So it came as a shock to find out in the process of the therapy that we went through her eating disorder that no, in fact, she was masking. She was deeply disturbed by her her inability to fit in. And I had no idea. No idea. Just wore it so well, as far as I'm just going to be very studious and very mature in school, and all her teachers loved her and thought she was so mature, and it was all an act, and it just all came out at once. So, yeah, I think if you notice something about your child that is slightly outside the norm, like I did notice the tics and I did notice those things, but I just thought, well, she's got it under control. I probably should have been paying closer attention. It's kind of in retrospect, it was a little bit of wishful thinking, put it that way. Like, oh, look, she doesn't seem to care. Yay. I don't have to worry about it. Right. But then I did. So,
I just wanted to add, I'm part of a boys parents group of just boys, and we did surveys. And what we found out is 85% of the boys have IQs over 130. So they're mostly gifted, and they mostly were either on the autism spectrum. They had ADHD, OCD, Asperger's, which has a new name now. But
I know we're not supposed to use that term, but I just do because I know everybody understands what that is, and they don't understand
exactly.
it.
So these are smart boys, and they're mostly socially awkward. They're 100% quirky. They're just, they're sort of nerdy, and they're the boys that don't feel like they fit in. And so this group takes them in. And like Glenn said, my son, I think, discovered this through anime as well. And I hate anime. I'm just so frustrated with it. He also, is very athletic, and he used to do a lot of sports. And I feel like he didn't feel like he fit in with those sports. And I think that caused him some questioning of himself. So I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to these things, but it's, like my sisters, I had a child later, and all my sisters had children before, and they said, you want your kids to be a nerd. They'll be safe. They'll be, they won't do drugs. They'll be academic and do well in college. Well, the nerds are the kids that are not safe in our society today. So it's really scary, because those were always the kids that actually maybe didn't had an awkward high school or experience, but then went on to excel in college and have a great career and do well and got confidence through their career. And it's destroying this whole generation of kids.
Right. It's so sad. So what would you all, and you can answer as you see fit. What would you like to see done? Like officially, we were talking before about if there should be legislation, some protection, child protections. What would be your wish list as far as a way to help protect these kids from the stuff? And it's so that parents, I mean, obviously you've mentioned things parents can do, books they can read, trends they should be mindful of, watch out for anime, watch out for gaming and things of that nature. But more officially, what do you think? Because this is just going on, in our tax dollars, even in a public situation, but even in private schools, this is all around. And, it's like they're being recruited almost into a kind of cult. Would you like to see something done more legislatively, and what would it be? Oh gosh, I can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Glenn.
Now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. So one of the things I'd say relates to having something better from a technological perspective to control for this, because that's where so many of them go down rabbit holes, certainly with both of my two, one of them getting on Reddit boards and the other using a website that was written by a gender dysphoric individual himself, who presents himself as a woman. And in the case of the younger one, for instance, whenever he created his Reddit IDs surreptitiously, used the default date of birth on it of 1/1/1900. Well, does Reddit think, and I have the screenshots for it because that was the second set of IDs that he created after I put the spyware monitoring on the computer. Does Reddit think to ask, oh, well, we have literally the oldest man alive using our service. Maybe we should send an email to him and or the Guinness Book of World Records to say, oh, we've got a 120-year-old male logging onto our gender dysphoria site. He's been in a closet for 120 years. And one of the aspects of that I noodle on a lot relates to, well, why can't there be some mechanism in place where there's some form of unique identification check, at the very least, for things that there's no way anybody should be surfing this at age 14. We can debate whether an 18-year-old should, but there's no way somebody should be able to get on such a site like that at age 14. Some unique identifier, something.
I can't hear you, Glenn. I'm so sorry.
Oh, just something that would be blocked entirely for them on something like that.
Right. I do want to share this. This is Gabrielle says, thank you for all your stories. My daughter's issues with this is what alerted me to my son's issues. No Left Turn in Education is fighting this hard. Are you familiar with that organization? No Left Turn in Education?
No, I'm writing it down. I'm making a note of it.
Okay. So that is a great organization, and they are fighting all kinds of issues like this. So Gabrielle specifically has a case that is working its way through the courts regarding her son and some things taught in his civics class where his civil rights were violated as far as free speech. And, they were trying to compel him to say things. And one of the things was that he, as a cisgendered male, was, an oppressor and automatically misogynist and things of that nature. So No Left Turns has all the information about her case as well. So they are fighting these issues like across the board, and a great organization to research. So thank you, Glenn, for that suggestion. Any other ideas or things you'd like to?
Yeah, I think this is a multi-pronged issue. It's the schools, obviously. I think there has to be a multi-pronged attack. I think we as parents are gathering, especially with GenSpect. We need to get to the mainstream media, which don't have the whats to report on this. And I mean, 60 Minutes really went out on a limb a few weeks ago with their special on this. And I know they were vilified for even showing the detransitioners, those who had changed their mind after they had mutilated their bodies. I think we have to get the legal profession to pay attention for medical malpractice purposes. So it's the education, the legislation, absolutely. And you see that happening in Texas and Arkansas, where they're ramping it up. And I think here in South Carolina, there has to be a multi-pronged approach to this. There's just no one way to get through. And it's turned into a political football, and it should not be. It should be, what are we doing with the kids? This is like lobotomies back in the 40s and 50s.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or multiple personality disorder in the 70s, or memory repression in the 80s and 90s. We've got to lift the lid off this. What I can tell you from personal experience, because in the first year or so, I wasn't telling anybody about this. I was mortified that this was happening in my house. And then once I started talking about it, honest to God, everybody knows somebody who's going through this. Everybody knows somebody. And it's amazing. And so I'm not shy about putting it out there. I bought multiple copies of Irreversible Damage, the detrans detox books. I'm handing them out like candy. Right. Because I think we have to be vocal, whether we have these children or not, because even if you don't have children, somebody else has children. I mean, there's a generation of children who are at extraordinary risk of being mutilated permanently. Mm-hmm. And where were we when that was happening?
Exactly.
The only thing that I would add is if you're from a state where it's more balanced or more right-leaning, more Republican, then I think it can be really effective to write your legislators and your local newspapers. I think it's important to run for office. If you're in a really left-leaning state like California, in terms of what to do, I really think it's like one-on-one meetings and talking individually instead of even sending letters. What I see in very blue locations is that if Republicans try to speak, or anybody, even Democrats try to speak, that it's against the mainstream, you get shut down so fast and you're just accused of being bigoted. And so it's really about the personal relationship. And so in states that are very blue, I think you have to really run on parent education and have parents protect their kids first. And I think Glenn's ideas are really important. And then work kind of behind the scenes on starting to change people's minds, because it can't be done publicly. You will be attacked.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective in Illinois, doing that sort of reach out that you're talking about made a lot of sense. We had an English teacher that was offering up a trans book to the literature curriculum that my son had then said to the people in his reading group, "Oh, I think I'm trans." This was prior to the declaration itself. We found out later, and we went to her, and I after having done some reading on it and being at that point, I was only moderately familiar with it. I said, this book is going to be very damaging for him to continue reading this. And her response was, well, we wanted to add more trans viewpoints to our curriculum. That was encouraged by the school board. And we said, well, do you think he's trans? She laughed at us. She's like, no, he's like the least trans person that we would ever have imagined. I've got somebody that comes into my class every day that it would be your stereotypical. And, in his case, so she kind of reduced the assignment substantially. She said she'd come back to us. She never did, which was, I view it as disrespectful in that sense. But she also eliminated it from a term paper to a couple of bullet points toward the end of the year. But it's a reach out that can be successful. It's, I view, his band director, for instance, at one point our son's yelling at us, well, why can't you treat me more like Skylar, who's this, absolutely beautiful girl, in the band, that then started presenting, herself as a boy. And, the band.
Can't hear you, Glenn. Can you hear me?
Will think to even call her a boy, there's this natural hesitancy because it's so obviously that she's not, yet You know, at one point our son's saying, well, why can't you treat us like, you know, he does for her? I'm like, well, because you're not.
Mm-hmm. That's just, so I'm getting the impression that even the people within the school, administrators, school boards, etc., have a almost cartoon image of who's trans and who they're helping, and they don't realize what they're doing to
They're
kids in general.
harming. They're
Yeah.
harming, not helping.
Yeah. I don't even think they're necessarily helping the kids who are, you know, that as she described, more stereotypically, whatever that means. They're not helping anybody. And so what I've been thinking about is working on improving parental rights, period. Like parental rights across the board. It seems almost incoherent right now. So, for example, my daughter wanted to get a second piercing in her ear, and she's 17. She couldn't, not without me physically showing up and signing on the dotted line. And I had to bring her birth certificate to prove I was her mother, that I was authorized to do this for a hole in her ear. Okay. And you have schools saying, we're going to allow the child to change their name, go get testosterone on school time, and all kinds of things. And we're not going to tell anybody. This just strikes me as bizarre. It's like when it comes to certain specific preferred medical decisions, and I say that intentionally because why else, right? There's no logical, objective reason to say yes to these and no to those. The child has complete privacy and all kinds of bodily autonomy. But then other things that are much more benign and not even as permanent, a hole could close up, right? No. Parents have to be there. So it feels, and I'm not suggesting that they should be able to go put holes all over their body without parents. I'm saying, can't we be rational about all of these decisions, have one standard across the board? If a child is talking about making alterations to their body, if they are expressing any confusion about the reality conveyed to the school by the parents. In other words, when you register your child, this is my daughter, this is my son, their name is this, their name is that, the parents' rights don't stop at the schoolhouse door. And yet for these very specific cherry-picked things, it seems like they are right now. And I guess that's my wish list item.
Mm-hmm.
We have a coherent parental rights policy. So when our children are interacting with other adults, especially by force, I mean, if they're in a public setting, especially, like it's compulsory school, right?
Yeah.
Even if they're in private school, they're supposed to be in school. They have to be somewhere or they're truant. So they and we should have rights, and those rights should attach to the parent first, not to the state, not to the strangers.
Right.
This in loco parentis thing, I think, has gone way too far. That's my 2 cents. Do you guys agree with me on that?
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree on that.
I wanted to say that because I live in California, I can't tell my friends because I don't believe they'll support me. I think everyone is captured by doing the right thing and that you're a bigot. I've been told horrible things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think people who live in different parts of the country might be able to appeal to people, but I can't do that. But what I am thinking could help is if parents who don't have trans kids could start going to the school boards and start going to their schools and ask the hard questions, because we can't, because
Right.
we will be treated as horrible parents, not accepting our trans kids.
Folks.
Right. Now I did
So
a show.
we need non-trans parents to just come out in groves and just storm the schools and storm the school board and go, what is going on? Because your kid could be next.
Right.
And you don't
Mhm.
know that. You have
Right.
you it's nothing about your parenting that is creating this. A lot of people think that that's what it is. I mean, I did. It was the last thing on my mind. So unless we get, I feel that if we don't get parents to just help us, because it could be their kid next. And that's what parents need to think about, and maybe they could help us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Claire. It's just one of those situations where, I mean, myself in the dark, I think back on myself a year ago, what's the inclination? The inclination is, oh, well, accept whoever for whoever they say they are. And it's absolutely the wrong approach whenever it comes to this issue, is that, the trans movement has largely lynched onto the gay movement where, I've had 2 gay roommates when I was in college, and they knew from a very, very early age that they were gay. And that's cool. The trans movement is trying to present itself as if, well, I knew I was trans from that very early age, and there's this, perhaps some very small sliver of people that genuinely knew that from a very early age. But by and large, with the rapid onset ones, it's coming from a variety of factors: social awkwardness, from feeling like you don't fit in, becoming uncomfortable with your body in puberty, all of these sorts of things.
Oh, Glenn, you're cutting out again.
Mm.
Glenn, I think you're cutting out a bit.
One more thing. If our children were struggling with drug addiction or alcohol addiction, or unhealthy relationships, people would be very sympathetic. But when it comes to this, we're in a box all by ourselves, unless we meet other people going through it. I myself and my husband, we have been met with some skepticism by our own family members. I have a niece who's chastised me. She's 26 years old, living in LA, telling me I'm a rotten mother, and that she was thinking of sending the testosterone directly to her house. I'm not kidding. I mean, and then I have friends, and I'm a lib, okay? No apologies here. But I have other liberal friends that are looking at me like I'm a phobe. I don't know who to trust. It's the most isolating feeling when you don't know who to trust in your own social and family circles.
So, as with other sort of dysphoric kind of problems, this, or even drug addiction, all of this affects the entire family.
Mm-hmm.
This tears apart families and puts you, as you said, in a box. And as my viewers and listeners can tell, your faces are not showing. You're using pseudonyms, and that's for good reason, because there are people who would use this to literally break up your family.
Mm-hmm.
And hurt your children even more.
Or fire you.
Exactly. And it makes me really angry. I do want to mention, some people have said, go to the school board. It's very important for everybody watching or listening to understand that not every school board or school committee has any say in any of this. In most cases, they don't get down to the curriculum level. They do affect health and building policy to a degree. So when we're talking about things like bathroom policies or policies about, that cover like legal protections for staff and things of that nature, they may have some say in what they're putting out as far as, say this or do that. But when it comes to what the teacher's doing right there in the classroom, I mean, maybe PV can speak to this because you've been in a school board. They're not all powerful, and they're not a judicial, not quasi judicial. They can't sort of like reach into the school and say, naughty, don't do this. So I think it's good to make their wishes known, or for people to know that you're not happy with some of the policy or like building policies or things that might be feeding this. But I think it has to go up to the boards. Higher state boards, where some of these curriculum decisions are being made. I know specifically in California, these are being done at the state level, where they approve a curriculum and then it gets disseminated on down. Like, this is okay, go use it, and it goes right into the classroom from there.
Yes, I totally agree. Sometimes boards and committees, it varies widely across the United States. It happens that in California that it is captured at the state level. And so your local district doesn't have that many options. But I still think that it's important to point out to the boards to speak
Sure.
publicly
Mhm.
and say, this is happening and this is what you're teaching kids. And yeah, I'm going to go fight it at the state board level, but you need to be aware of it here. It at least publicizes it for parents.
Correct. I mean, the main reason to go to the school board meetings and do that is one place where you have public comment more frequently. It's all recorded. The sunshine laws mean that everybody gets to read it or see it, and you can, as you say, use that as a bully pulpit, sort of, to broadcast your message. I just want to make sure people understand that if they think those board members have direct impact, then they're making specific demands of the board members, or they think I will run for that board and I will make the change, that's probably not going to occur. It's more like your stage from which you can, share information publicly, and then go to the state board, go to the legislature, go to, if that's the path you want to take, because the local school board probably won't be able to do it. So I know everybody is needing to wrap up. Are there any final things that you would like to say to the audience or to me or anybody?
No, just be mindful, and thank you for listening to us. Just be mindful that it's more pervasive than you may realize, and keep your eyes and ears open, and try to utilize the resources that we've all been talking about, because there are people out there that are it's happening to them, and they don't know where to go and where to turn to. And like I said, Google kept me from learning about it for 6 months.
Right. And I will put all of these resources in the show notes after this is done, when as the replay is going up and everything, I will be adding it to the notes, all the links, all the books, everything that we've been discussing. Anybody else?
Just thank you. We're those of us who are in the trenches, we're trying to help our own children. We're very focused on that, but we're also trying to change the culture. And we appreciate all the publicity that we can get around this, spreading the word. And we appreciate parents, as Glenn said, and as Dee said, and as Clara said, everybody needs to be in this fight together.
Right. And you're saying thank you to us, and I feel like we owe you a debt of gratitude, because what you've done here in terms of sharing your story is something that we couldn't get any other way, for the same reasons you had trouble getting information. If we try to search for it, we're not going to find it. So you've volunteered to come and share this very important information, very private information with us publicly, and I am so, so grateful. Thank you so much. Glenn, did you want to say anything?
Still
can't hear you. I'm sorry.
So much of it is technology oriented that you just have to lock down your kids' technology excessively and monitor it so closely, because that's where they're getting a lot of the ideas from, and their friends then want to be socially accepting of them, of whatever their choice is.
Right. Absolutely. So thank you so, so much, all of you, for coming and spending this time. And as I said, the replay will be up immediately, and along with all the comments, and I will be putting these resources in the show notes. So thank you all for watching. Please do share, like, share, subscribe. Everything feeds the algorithm, which means that people searching for this information will be more likely to find it. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.